The great hall of the galactic Concord was filled with light. Thousands of floating crystals hung in the air. Each crystal glowed with a soft blue color. They cast gentle shadows across the faces of the 17 different species who had gathered for the annual Assembly of Worlds. Ambassador Kethra of the Selvani Collective stood near the center of the hall. Her silver skin reflected the light from the crystals above. She had 4 arms, like all her people, and she kept 2 of them folded behind her back in a sign of respect. Her large black eyes moved slowly across the room, watching the other delegates as they talked and laughed. 3,000 years. That was how long the galactic Concord had kept peace among the stars. 3,000 years of trade, cooperation, and shared knowledge. Kethra felt proud to be part of such a great alliance. Her people, the Selvani, had been members for almost 2,000 of those years. They were respected. They were trusted. They had helped build this civilization. Ambassador Kethra, said a deep voice behind her. She turned to see High Commander Vormesh of the Morthani Empire. He was tall, nearly 3 meters in height, with thick gray skin covered in natural armor plates. His species had evolved on a heavy gravity world, and they were among the strongest beings in the known galaxy. You seem lost in thought. I was thinking about history, Kethra replied, about how far we have all come. Vormesh made a sound that might have been a laugh. History is for scholars and children. I prefer to think about the future. The future grows from the past, Kethra said. We cannot understand where we are going if we do not remember where we have been. Perhaps. Vormesh looked around the great hall with obvious pride. But what matters is that we are here now. The 17 species of the Concord, united and strong. Nothing in this galaxy can threaten us. Kethra nodded, but something small and cold moved through her mind. A memory. A story her grandmother had told her when she was young. A story about another species, one that was not here in this hall. One that would never be here. The humans. She pushed the thought away. The humans were gone. They had been gone for thousands of years. They were nothing but dust and memory now. Far from the Great Hall, in a small office on a research station orbiting a dead star, a Selvani scientist named Rilkan was studying old data. Very old data. The kind of data that most people had forgotten existed. Rilkan was not like other scientists. He did not care about new discoveries or famous awards. He cared about the past. He spent his days reading through ancient files and forgotten archives. He believed that the past held secrets that could change everything. Tonight, he was looking at records from the early days of space exploration. Records from before the Concord was formed. Records from a time when the galaxy was wild and dangerous. His 4 eyes moved quickly across the screen in front of him. Most of the data was corrupted. Time had damaged the storage systems, but here and there he could make out words and images. One file caught his attention. It was labeled simply, Sol 3 Observation Report Final. Sol 3, that was the old name for the human homeworld, the planet they had called Earth. Rilkan opened the file. His heart began to beat faster as he read. The report was written by a Selvani observation team that had been watching Earth from a hidden station in the outer part of the human solar system. It was dated 4,327 years ago. Day 1247 of observation, the report began. The humans continue to advance at an alarming rate. In less than 300 years, they have gone from simple chemical rockets to prototype faster-than-light engines. This is unprecedented. No species in our records has ever developed so quickly. Rilkan scrolled down, his eyes growing wider. Day 1312. The humans have detected our observation station. We do not know how. Our stealth technology should be far beyond their ability to sense. They have sent radio signals in our direction. The signals contain mathematical sequences. They are trying to communicate. Day 1340. The Concord Council has decided not to respond to the human signals. The humans are considered too dangerous for contact. Their history is filled with violence. They fight wars among themselves constantly. The Council believes they will destroy themselves soon, as all such species do. Day 1456. The humans have launched their first interstellar probes. The probes are primitive but functional. At their current rate of development, the humans may achieve true interstellar travel within 200 years. Day 1502. Emergency report. War has broken out on Earth. The humans are using nuclear weapons against each other. The destruction is massive. Cities are burning. The atmosphere is filling with radiation and ash. The Council's prediction appears to be correct. The humans are destroying themselves. Rilkan paused. He had heard this part of the story before. Everyone had. The humans had burned their own world. They had killed themselves in a great war. It was a tragedy, yes, but also a lesson. A warning about what happened to species that could not control their own violent nature. But the report continued. Day 1534. Something unexpected has happened. In the final days before total collapse, the humans launched a fleet of ships. We counted 47 vessels of various sizes. The ships are heading away from Earth at high speed, toward the outer edge of the galaxy. They are using a form of faster-than-light travel we have not seen before. We attempted to track them, but they have disappeared beyond our sensor range. Day 1535. Final report. Earth is dead. The atmosphere is toxic. The surface is covered in radiation. No human life remains on the planet. However, we must note for the record that not all humans died with their world. An unknown number escaped on the fleet we observed. The Council has decided that these survivors are not a concern. They were heading toward empty space, far from any habitable worlds. They will die in the void. This observation mission is now complete. May the humans serve as a lesson to all who come after. Rilkan sat back in his chair. His hearts were pounding now. His hands were shaking. 47 ships. 47 ships full of humans had escaped Earth before it died, and the Conquered had simply decided not to follow them, not to check on them, not to help them or monitor them or even think about them again. For 4,000 years, everyone had believed the humans were extinct. But what if they were wrong? Ambassador Kethra returned to her private quarters after the assembly. She was tired. Diplomacy was exhausting work. She wanted nothing more than to sleep for many hours. But when she entered her rooms, she found a message waiting for her. It was marked urgent and classified. It came from the Science Division. She opened it with a frown. Ambassador, the message read, I apologize for disturbing you at this hour. My name is Rilkan. I am a researcher specializing in historical archives. I have discovered something that I believe you need to see immediately. It concerns the humans. Kethra felt that cold feeling again, the one she had felt in the Great Hall, the one that reminded her of old stories and dark warnings. She sent a reply, come to my quarters at once. Rilkan arrived within the hour. He was young, Kethra noticed. His silver skin still had the bright shine of youth. His eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. Tell me what you have found, Kethra said. Rilkan showed her the old observation report. He explained what it meant. He talked about the 47 ships and the unknown form of faster-than-light travel. He talked about 4,000 years of silence. This is interesting, Kethra said slowly, but it changes nothing. Even if some humans survive, they fled into empty space. There is nothing out there. No planets, no resources, no hope. They would have died within a generation. That is what I thought too, Rilkan said, but then I found this. He pulled up another file. This one was much more recent. It was a report from just 3 days ago. A deep space probe went silent near the Carina dwarf galaxy, Rilkan explained. The Science Division assumed it was a malfunction. Probes fail all the time in deep space, but I looked at the data it sent back before it went dark. He showed Kethra an image. It was blurry and distorted, but she could make out a shape. A ship. A massive ship, larger than anything the Concord had ever built, and on its hull, barely visible, was a symbol. A blue circle with patches of green and brown. I cross-referenced this symbol with our historical archives, Rokan said. His voice was barely a whisper now. It matches images from Earth. It is how the humans represented their planet. Kethra stared at the image. Her mind refused to accept what she was seeing. It was impossible. It had to be impossible. There is more, Rokan continued. 2 more probes have gone silent in the same region, and yesterday we lost contact with a science vessel that was sent to investigate. Lost contact. It simply disappeared. No distress signal, no explanation. One moment it was there and the next it was gone. Kethra stood very still. The cold feeling had spread through her entire body now. It was no longer just a whisper of unease. It was fear. Real, deep fear. We must tell the council, she said. I agree, but Ambassador, Rokan hesitated. What do we tell them? That the humans might still be alive, that they might have been out there for 4,000 years building and growing and remembering. Kethra thought about the stories her grandmother had told her, stories about the humans and their strange nature. They were short-lived creatures, her grandmother had said. They only lived for about 80 to 100 years, but in that short time they burned with an intensity that no other species could match. They loved fiercely. They hated fiercely. They never forgot a kindness. And they never forgot a wrong. We tell them the truth, Kethra said. We tell them that we may have made a terrible mistake. We watched the humans burn their own world and we did nothing to help them. We knew some of them survived and we chose to ignore them. We assumed they would die in the dark between stars. She looked at the image of the massive ship again. The ship that was larger than anything the Concord had ever built. If they are still alive, she said quietly, then they have had 4,000 years to remember what we did. 4,000 years to grow strong. 4,000 years to plan. What do you think they want? Rokan asked. Kethra did not answer for a long time. She thought about her grandmother's stories. She thought about human history, full of war and violence, but also full of art and music and love. She thought about how the Conquered had treated them, how they had watched and studied and ultimately abandoned them. I do not know what they want, she finally said, but I know one thing. Whatever they have become out there in the darkness, we helped create it, and now we will have to face it. 3 days later, the Conquered Council met in emergency session. The great hall that had been full of light and celebration was now dark and tense. The floating crystals had been dimmed. The delegates sat in their seats with fear on their faces. High Commander Vormesh stood at the center of the hall. His voice echoed off the ancient walls. The Science Division has confirmed our worst fears, he said. Contact has been lost with 7 probes, 2 science vessels, and 1 military scout ship in the region near the Carina dwarf galaxy. Before each disappearance, our sensors detected the presence of unknown vessels, vessels of enormous size, vessels bearing the symbol of the human homeworld. A wave of whispers moved through the hall. Vormesh raised his hand for silence. We do not know how many ships they have. We do not know what weapons they possess. We do not know their intentions, but we know one thing for certain. He paused, letting his words sink in. The humans are not extinct. They have survived, and they are coming. The whispers became shouts. Delegates jumped to their feet, talking over each other in panic. Some demanded immediate military action. Others called for diplomacy. A few suggested running, fleeing to the far corners of the galaxy. Ambassador Kethra sat quietly through all of it. She watched her fellow delegates argue and panic, and she felt a strange sense of calm. This was their doing, she knew, all of them. The Selvani, the Morthani, all the species of the Conquered. They had watched the humans struggle and suffer, and they had chosen to do nothing. They had assumed the humans would simply disappear, like so many other species before them. But humans were not like other species. Her grandmother had told her that long ago. Humans did not give up. Humans did not fade away. Humans survived. And now, after 4,000 years of silence, they were coming back. Kethra looked up at the darkened crystals above her head. She thought about the future that Vormesh had once been so confident about. The future of the 17 species, united and strong. That future was over now. A new future was beginning. And Kethra suspected that it would be written not by the conquered, but by the species they had left for dead among the stars. The humans were no longer a myth. They were real. And they remembered everything. Commander Yulvith had served in the Conquered's 3rd exploratory fleet for over 200 years. She had seen many things during that time. She had watched stars being born in great clouds of fire and gas. She had walked on worlds where the ground was made of crystal and the sky burned with 3 suns. She had encountered creatures that lived in the vacuum of space itself, floating through the void like living ships. But she had never been afraid, not truly afraid, not until now. Her ship, the Vigilance, was the largest vessel in the 3rd Fleet. It carried a crew of 8,000 and enough weapons to destroy a small moon. For 2 centuries, it had been more than enough to handle any threat they encountered. Now, looking at the image on her command screen, Yulvith felt like she was commanding a child's toy. The ship that floated before them was beyond anything she had ever seen. It was black as the space around it, and it seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. Its shape was unlike any conquered design. It was long and angular, with sharp edges that reminded Yulvith of a predator's teeth. Weapons ports lined its hull in rows that stretched on and on, more firepower on a single ship than in her entire fleet combined. And it was not alone. Behind the first ship, more shapes emerged from the darkness. Dozens of them, then hundreds, then thousands. They kept coming, an endless tide of black vessels appearing out of nothing like ghosts materializing from shadow. "Commander," her sensor officer said, his voice was shaking. I am counting over 12,000 ships, and more are arriving." 12,000 ships. The entire conquered military, gathered from all 17 species, consisted of about 15,000 vessels. These humans, these creatures that were supposed to be dead, had built an armada that could match the combined might of the galaxy. In 4,000 years of silence, Yulvith's hands gripped the arms of her command chair. Her 3 hearts were pounding so hard she could hear them in her own ears. She had to do something. She had to say something. Her crew was looking to her for guidance. "Open a communication channel," she ordered. "All frequencies." "Channel open, Commander." Yulvith took a deep breath. She was about to speak to a species that had been dead for 4,000 years, a species that her own people had helped abandon. She did not know what to say. "Unknown vessels," she began. "This is Commander Yulvith of the Galactic Conquered. We come in peace. We wish to communicate. Please respond." Silence. The human ships hung in space like a wall of shadow, unmoving and unresponsive. Seconds passed, then minutes. Yulvith began to wonder if they had even heard her. Then a voice came through the speakers. It was speaking in a language Yulvith did not recognize at first. Then her translator activated, and she heard the words in her own tongue. "You forgot about us." The voice was calm. There was no anger in it, no hatred, just a simple statement of fact. "That was a mistake." The message spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Every species heard it. Every world received it. The humans were alive. The humans had returned, and they had not forgotten. On the Selvani homeworld, Ambassador Kethra watched the recording of the human fleet over and over again. She counted the ships. She studied their designs. She tried to understand what she was seeing. The humans had been a young species when they burned their world. They had only just begun to explore space. Their technology was primitive compared to the Conquereds. They should have died in the void. They should have faded away to nothing. Instead, they had become something else entirely. "How is this possible?" she asked Rokan, who stood beside her. "How could they have built all of this?" Rokan had been researching human history since his discovery in the archives. He had learned as much as he could about the strange species that had once lived on the third planet from the star called Sol. "The humans were different from us," he said slowly. "From all of us. They lived short lives, only about 80 years on average. But that made them urgent. They did not have time to be careful. They did not have time to plan for centuries. They had to act, to create, to build, all in the span of a single brief lifetime. But that should have made them weaker, not stronger. No, Ambassador. It made them desperate. And desperation, combined with intelligence, is a powerful force. The humans accomplished in one lifetime what most species take 10 lifetimes to achieve. They went from simple farming to nuclear power in less than 200 years. They went from horses to spacecraft in 100. Kethra looked at the image of the human fleet again. 12,000 ships, probably more by now. An entire civilization built in the darkness between galaxies. "They had 4,000 years, she said quietly. 4,000 years with nothing to do but survive and remember. Yes, and if they developed at even a fraction of their historical rate." Rokan did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. The implications were terrifying. On the Morthani throne world, High Commander Vormesh was not thinking about implications. He was thinking about war. The war chamber was filled with the greatest military minds of the Morthani Empire. Generals, admirals, strategists, all gathered around a massive holographic display that showed the current position of the human fleet. "They have stopped at the edge of conquered space," one admiral reported. "They have not advanced further. Our scouts report no aggressive movements." "Yet," Vormesh said, his deep voice echoed through the chamber, "they have not attacked yet, but they will. A species does not build 12,000 warships for peaceful purposes." "Perhaps they want to negotiate," another general suggested. "Perhaps they only want recognition, a place in the conquered." Vormesh slammed his fist on the table. The sound was like thunder. "They want revenge," he roared. "Think about what we did to them. We watched their world burn and did nothing. We let them fly off into the void to die alone. For 4,000 years they have had nothing to think about except what we did to them, what we failed to do for them." He pointed at the holographic display, at the massive human ships that dwarfed anything the Morthani had ever built. "They did not build those ships for diplomacy. They built them for war. And if we do not strike first, while we still have the advantage of numbers, they will destroy us all." The chamber fell silent. Every officer present knew what Vormesh was suggesting. A preemptive attack. A first strike against a species that had not yet made any hostile moves. It was dangerous. It was possibly suicidal. But looking at those human ships, many of them wondered if the High Commander might be right. "The Conquered Council will never approve an attack," one admiral said finally. "The Selvani will block it. The Kethnar will refuse to participate." "Then we will not ask the Council," Vormesh said. His eyes were hard as stone. "The Morthani Empire has faced threats before without the help of our so-called allies. We will do so again. Begin mobilizing the fleet. All ships, all reserves. We strike within 30 days. News of the Morthani mobilization spread quickly through conquered space. It was supposed to be secret, but there were too many ships, too many soldiers, too many supply lines to hide completely. Ambassador Kethra learned of it through her intelligence network. When she read the report, she felt a cold dread settle into her stomach. "Fools," she whispered, "absolute fools." She contacted the Kethnar immediately. The Kethnar were the oldest of the spacefaring species, the founders of the Conquered itself. They were wise and patient, and they understood things that younger species did not. The Kethnar elder who appeared on her screen was ancient beyond measure. His skin was like old paper, thin and pale and covered in patterns of dark spots. His eyes glowed with a soft inner light. "Ambassador Kethra," he said. His voice was like wind through dry leaves. "I have been expecting your call. Elder, you must stop the Morthani. If they attack the humans unprovoked, it could mean the end of everything. The end of the conquered, perhaps the end of all of us." The elder was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was very soft. "I cannot stop the Morthani, Ambassador. They are afraid, and fear makes beings do foolish things. But I can tell you something that may help you understand what is happening." "Anything, Elder, please." "When the humans first began to explore space, we watched them. All of us did. We saw a species of great potential. They were creative, adaptable, and determined. In many ways, they reminded us of ourselves when we were young. Then why did you not help them? Why did you let them destroy themselves?" The elder closed his eyes. For a moment he looked not wise but simply old and tired and sad. "Because we were afraid, Ambassador. We saw their potential, yes, but we also saw their violence, their endless wars, their ability to hate each other over differences that seemed meaningless to us. We looked at the humans and we saw ourselves reflected back. We saw what we might have been if we had not learned to control our darker impulses." He opened his eyes again, and Kethra saw something in them that she had never seen before in a Kethnar: shame. "We convinced ourselves that they would destroy themselves, that it was inevitable, that there was nothing we could do. But the truth is, we were afraid of what they might become. We were afraid that they would surpass us. So we watched and we waited, and when their world burned, we told ourselves it was for the best. And now they have returned. Yes, they have returned, and they are everything we feared they would become, everything and more." Kethra felt tears forming in her eyes. She was not sure if they were tears of sadness or tears of fear. "What do we do, Elder? How do we fix this?" The Kethnar elder was quiet for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his words were heavy with 4,000 years of regret. "I do not know if this can be fixed, Ambassador. Some mistakes are too great, some wrongs are too deep, but I will tell you this. The Morthani plan to attack because they believe the humans are monsters. They believe that the only way to survive is to destroy the humans before the humans destroy them." "And what do you believe?" "I believe that the humans are not monsters, not yet. They have had 4,000 years to become monsters and they have not attacked us. They have not burned our worlds or killed our people. They have simply appeared. They have shown us what they have become. They have reminded us that they exist. They want us to know they are there. Yes, they want us to know. They want us to remember, and they want us to understand that we cannot ignore them anymore." Kethra thought about this. She thought about the message the humans had sent. "You forgot about us. That was a mistake." It was not a threat, she realized. Not exactly. It was a statement, a declaration, a way of saying we are still here, we survived, we matter. "What happens if the Morthani attack?" she asked. The elder's eyes darkened. "Then we will learn whether the humans have become monsters after all, and I fear that we will not like the answer." 23 days after the first contact, Commander Yulvith received new orders. She was to hold her position and observe. She was not to engage the human fleet. She was not to provoke them in any way. She was relieved. Her ships were still floating in space, surrounded by the massive human armada. For 23 days, neither side had moved. Neither side had fired. They simply watched each other across the void, two civilizations taking measure of one another. But on the 24th day, everything changed. A new wave of ships appeared on her sensors. Not human ships, Morthani ships. Thousands of them, the entire military might of the Morthani Empire, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in a formation that could only mean one thing. "Commander," her sensor officer shouted, "the Morthani are powering weapons. They are targeting the human fleet." Yulvith felt her blood turn to ice. Open a channel to the Morthani flagship, now. Channel open. High Commander Vormesh, this is Commander Yulvith of the Third Fleet. Stand down, do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. Vormesh's voice came through cold and hard. Stand aside, Commander. This does not concern you. The Morthani will handle the human threat ourselves. You cannot win this fight. Look at their ships. They outclass us in every way. We outnumber them. Numbers will prevail. You will doom us all. But Vormesh did not reply. On Yulvith's screen, she watched as the Morthani fleet opened fire. Thousands of weapons discharged at once. The space between the fleets lit up with fire and energy. For a moment, Yulvith dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, Vormesh was right. Maybe numbers would be enough. Then the human ships began to move. They moved like nothing Yulvith had ever seen. They were fast, impossibly fast, dancing through the Morthani weapons fire like it was nothing. And when they fired back, the Morthani ships exploded, one after another like stars dying in rapid succession. The humans did not miss. Every shot found its target. Every weapon hit home. What are they using? Yulvith whispered. Her weapons officer was staring at his screen in disbelief. I do not know, Commander. The energy signatures are unlike anything in our database. They seem to be bending space itself. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted less than an hour. When it was over, the Morthani fleet was gone. Thousands of ships, millions of soldiers, reduced to floating debris in the cold of space. The human fleet had not lost a single vessel. And then, slowly, the massive black ships began to turn. They oriented themselves toward conquered space, toward the worlds of the 17 species, toward everything that Yulvith had sworn to protect. A new message came through the communication channel, the same calm voice as before. We did not want this, remember that. We came in peace. We were willing to talk, but you attacked us. You made your choice. A pause then. Now we will make ours. The human fleet began to move forward, and Commander Yulvith, floating helplessly in the wreckage of Morthani ambitions, could do nothing but watch. The war had begun, and already it was lost. Admiral Helena Vance stood on the bridge of the Remembrance and watched the stars. She was 63 years old, with gray hair cut short and eyes the color of steel. Her face was lined with the marks of command, of decisions made and burdens carried. She had spent her entire life preparing for this moment. And now the moment had arrived. Behind her, the bridge crew worked in quiet efficiency. They were all human, of course. Every person in the fleet was human. 12,000 ships, 40 million soldiers, and countless support staff. The largest military force in the history of their species. All of it built for one purpose, to go home. Admiral, her executive officer said. He was a tall man named Marcus Chen, with dark eyes and a calm demeanor that Vance had come to rely on over the years. The conquered fleet has withdrawn beyond the debris field. They are not engaging. Good, Vance did not turn from the window. What about the survivors? We have picked up 3,000 Morthani escape pods. Medical teams are treating the wounded. Most are in stable condition. Make sure they receive the best care we can provide. They are not our enemies, Marcus. They are victims of their own leader's stupidity. Yes, Admiral. Vance finally turned from the window. She walked to the center of the bridge, where a massive holographic display showed the current state of the galaxy. The Conquered's territory was marked in blue. The human fleet's position was marked in red, and the path they would take was marked in white, cutting through the blue like a knife through silk. Show me Earth, she said. The display shifted, zooming in on a small yellow star at the edge of what had once been conquered space. Around the star orbited 8 planets. The third planet was brown and gray, scarred by ancient wounds that had never healed. Earth, the homeworld, the place their ancestors had fled 4,000 years ago. Vance looked at the dead world and felt something tighten in her chest. She had never seen Earth with her own eyes. No human alive had. It existed only in records and memories, passed down through generations like a sacred text. But she knew its history. Every human knew. They learned it as children before they learned anything else. The story of how their world had burned. The story of how the conquered had watched it happen. The story of how 47 ships had escaped into the void, carrying the last hope of humanity with them. Those ships had traveled for centuries, crossing distances that should have been impossible. They had found a new home in a distant galaxy, a harsh world that demanded everything they had just to survive. They had built and struggled and nearly died 100 times. But they had survived, and in surviving they had grown strong. "Admiral," Chen's voice interrupted her thoughts. "We are receiving a transmission from the Conquered Council. They are requesting immediate negotiations." "Of course they are." Vance smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "They saw what we did to the Morthani fleet. Now they want to talk." "Should I refuse the transmission?" Vance considered this for a moment. Part of her wanted to say yes. Part of her wanted to simply ignore the Conquered's pleas and continue forward, burning a path of destruction through their precious civilization. But that was not why they had come. That was not what the Founders had wanted. That was not what it meant to be human. "No," she said finally. "Accept the transmission. Let them say what they want to say. It is time they understood who we are and what we want." The transmission came through on a private channel, projected onto the main display of the bridge. Vance found herself looking at a room full of alien faces. She recognized some of them from the historical records. The silver-skinned Selvani, the massive Morthani, the ancient Kethnar, all 17 species of the Conquered, gathered together in what was obviously an emergency session. "Admiral Vance," one of the Selvani said. Her voice was carefully controlled, but Vance could hear the fear beneath it. "I am Ambassador Kethra of the Selvani Collective. On behalf of the Galactic Conquered, I want to express our deep regret for the actions of the Morthani Empire. Their attack was unauthorized and does not represent the will of the Council." "That may be true," Vance replied. "But the Morthani were members of your Conquered. Their ships flew under your banner. Their attack was made possible by their alliance with you. You cannot simply disown them now that it is convenient." The Morthani representative, a large male with gray armor plates and angry eyes, stepped forward. "We acted to protect the Conquered from your aggression. You appear out of nowhere with a massive fleet, and we are supposed to simply accept it. You are the aggressors here, human." Vance looked at him for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but filled with something that made the Morthani step back. "Aggression? Let me tell you about aggression. 4,000 years ago, my ancestors watched their world die. They watched their cities burn, their families die, their entire civilization collapse into ash and radiation. And while this was happening, your Conquered did nothing. You watched from your hidden stations. You recorded everything. And then you flew away, confident that we would simply disappear." She stepped closer to the display, her eyes locked on the alien faces before her. "We had reached out to you. We had sent messages trying to make contact, trying to join your civilization. We did not want war. We wanted peace. We wanted to be part of something greater than ourselves, and you ignored us. You decided we were too dangerous, too violent, too primitive. You decided to let us die." "That was 4,000 years ago," the Morthani protested. "None of us were alive then. We cannot be held responsible for the decisions of our ancestors." "Neither can we," Vance replied. "But we are all living with the consequences of those decisions, are we not?" The chamber fell silent. Vance let the silence stretch, let them feel the weight of it. "When our ancestors fled Earth," she continued, "they carried with them everything they could save. Records, artifacts, knowledge, genetic samples. They knew they were probably going to die in the void. They knew the odds were against them, but they refused to simply give up and accept extinction." She smiled slightly, a genuine smile this time. That is what it means to be human. We do not give up. We do not surrender. We do not go quietly into the darkness. And we do not forget. The negotiations continued for hours. Vance listened as the various conquered representatives made their arguments, their pleas, their demands. Some were arrogant, insisting that the humans had no right to enter conquered space. Some were apologetic, begging for forgiveness for wrongs committed thousands of years ago. Some were calculating, trying to figure out what the humans wanted so they could offer it in exchange for peace. But it was the Kethnar elder who finally asked the right question. "Admiral Vance," he said, his ancient voice cutting through the noise of the other delegates, "you have shown us your power. You have proven that you could destroy us if you wished, but you have not done so. You have come this far and stopped. You have taken prisoners instead of killing them. You have given us the chance to speak instead of simply annihilating us." He paused, his glowing eyes fixed on hers. "Why, what is it that you truly want?" Vance met his gaze. In that moment, she felt a connection to this ancient being, a recognition of something shared. He understood, she realized. He was perhaps the only one of them who truly understood. "What do we want?" she repeated. "We want our home back." The chamber erupted in confused murmurs. Ambassador Kethra leaned forward. "Your home, you mean Earth, but Earth is dead. It has been dead for 4,000 years. The atmosphere is toxic. The surface is covered in radiation. Nothing can live there." "Nothing can live there yet," Vance corrected. "But we have spent 4,000 years developing technologies that your conquered cannot even imagine. We have terraforming capabilities that can heal a dead world. We have atmospheric processors that can clean the worst pollution. We have radiation scrubbers that can make the deadliest ground safe again." She brought up a new image on the display. It showed Earth, but not the brown and gray Earth of the present. It showed Earth as it had been 4,000 years ago before the war. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds swirling over a living world. "This is what we want," Vance said. "We want to go home. We want to heal our world. We want to rebuild what was lost." "And in return," the Kethnar elder asked. "In return, you will leave us alone. Earth and its solar system will be human territory, now and forever. You will withdraw all presence from our space. You will return all artifacts taken from our world, and you will formally acknowledge what your ancestors did to us." The Morthani representative laughed harshly. "You destroyed our fleet. You killed millions of our warriors, and now you want us to apologize to you." Vance turned her cold eyes on him. "Your fleet attacked us unprovoked. Your warriors fired the first shots. We defended ourselves. If anyone should be apologizing, it is you." "She is right," Ambassador Kethra said quietly. The Morthani turned to her in shock, but she continued. "The Morthani attacked without authorization. They started this conflict. We cannot blame the humans for defending themselves." "Thank you, Ambassador," Vance said. "But I am not looking for blame. I am not looking for revenge. I am looking for justice. Simple, straightforward justice." She looked around the chamber at all the alien faces, all the species that had abandoned her ancestors to die in the dark. 4,000 years ago, you made a choice. You chose to ignore us. You chose to let us burn. You told yourselves that we would simply disappear, that the galaxy would be better off without us. "We were wrong," the Kethnar elder said. "Yes, you were wrong, but we are not here to punish you for that mistake. We are not here to conquer or destroy. We are here because we survived. We are here because we remember. And we are here because, despite everything you did to us, we still believe in something better." After the formal negotiations ended, Vance remained on the bridge alone. She had asked Chen to give her some time to think. The next few hours would determine the fate of billions of lives. She needed to be sure she was making the right decisions. She walked back to the window and looked out at the stars again. Somewhere out there, beyond the light years and the void, was her true home. New Terra, they called it, the world their ancestors had found and made their own. Vance had been born on New Terra. She had grown up in its cities, walked through its forests, swum in its oceans. It was a beautiful world in its own harsh way. The founders had chosen well. But it was not Earth. Every human child learned about Earth. They learned about its blue skies and green hills. They learned about its animals and plants, most of which now existed only as genetic samples in carefully maintained vaults. They learned about its history, its cultures, its art and music and literature. They learned about what had been lost. And they learned about what had been done to them. Vance remembered her grandmother telling her stories about the flight from Earth. Her grandmother had been a child during the Exodus, one of the youngest survivors. She had watched through a porthole as Earth grew smaller and smaller behind them, a tiny blue dot fading into the darkness. "We never stopped loving it," her grandmother had said. "Even when it was gone, even when we knew we could never go back, Earth was home, it always would be." Now, for the first time in 4,000 years, they could go back. They had the power to heal their world, to restore what had been destroyed. They had the strength to force the conquered to respect them. But they also had a choice to make. They could use their power for vengeance. They could burn the conquered's worlds the way their own world had been burned. They could make the galaxy pay for what it had done to humanity. Or they could use their power for something else, something better. Vance thought about her grandmother again. She thought about the stories, the memories, the hopes and dreams that had been passed down through generations of humans in exile. "We did not survive just to become monsters," her grandmother had said. "We survived to prove that we were better than they thought we were, better than violence, better than hate, better than fear." Vance closed her eyes. She thought about the Morthani prisoners in the medical bay, being treated by human doctors. She thought about the conquered representatives, arguing and pleading and trying to understand. She thought about all the billions of beings across the galaxy who were now waiting to learn their fate. They expected monsters. They expected revenge. They expected the humans to be exactly what the ancient conquered had feared they would become. But that was not who they were. That was not who they would ever be. Vance opened her eyes and turned back to the command console. She had a decision to make, and she knew now what that decision would be. They would take Earth back. They would heal their world. They would rebuild their civilization. But they would not destroy the conquered. They would not burn innocent worlds. They would not prove the ancient fears right. They would show the galaxy what humanity truly was. Not monsters, not conquerors, not destroyers. Survivors, builders, dreamers. And maybe in time, friends. The formal agreement was signed 3 days later. The conquered agreed to all of humanity's terms. Earth and its solar system were recognized as human territory. All conquered presence would be withdrawn. All artifacts would be returned. A formal statement of regret would be issued, acknowledging the mistakes of the past. In exchange, humanity agreed to peace. They would not attack conquered worlds. They would not interfere with conquered business. They would coexist, separately but peacefully, until such time as both sides were ready to meet as equals. It was not perfect. There were those on both sides who wanted more. Morthani hardliners demanded revenge for their destroyed fleet. Human extremists argued that the conquered should be made to suffer for their crimes. But the agreement held, and slowly, tentatively, the galaxy began to adjust to a new reality. Humanity was no longer a myth. Humanity was no longer a memory. Humanity was real and powerful and here to stay. And Admiral Helena Vance, standing on the bridge of the Remembrance as her fleet began the long journey toward Earth, allowed herself a small smile. They were going home. The negotiations had ended, but the real work was just beginning. Ambassador Kethra stood on the observation deck of her diplomatic vessel and watched as the human fleet moved past. Ship after ship, an endless parade of black hulls and gleaming weapons, all heading toward the dead world called Earth. She had volunteered for this mission. When the Conquered Council asked for representatives to accompany the human fleet and observe their restoration efforts, Kethra had been the first to offer. Some called her brave, others called her foolish. She called herself curious. She wanted to understand these creatures. She wanted to know how they had survived, how they had grown so powerful, how they had maintained their hope across 4,000 years of exile. Most of all, she wanted to know why they had chosen mercy instead of vengeance. "Ambassador," the voice came from behind her. She turned to find a human woman standing in the doorway. The woman was tall and thin, with brown skin and hair pulled back in a tight braid. She wore the gray uniform of the human military with several medals on her chest. "Captain Torres," Kethra said, "thank you for meeting with me." Captain Elena Torres nodded and walked to stand beside her at the window. For a moment, they both watched the fleet in silence. "You asked to learn about us," Torres said finally. "About our history, our journey. I have been assigned to answer your questions." "I appreciate that. I have many questions." "I expect you do." Tor's voice was neutral, but Kethra thought she detected a hint of bitterness beneath it. "Ask what you want. I will answer honestly." Kethra thought carefully about her first question. There were so many things she wanted to know, but one question burned brighter than all the others. "How did you survive?" she asked. "Our records say 47 ships left Earth. That is not many. The journey to the Carina dwarf must have taken centuries. How did you not die along the way?" Torres was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft, filled with memories that were not her own but that she had inherited from those who came before. "It was not easy," she said. "The early years were the hardest. The founders had planned as well as they could, but space is cruel. Equipment broke down. Resources ran short. Diseases spread through the cramped ships. Many died." She paused, looking out at the fleet around them. Of the 47 ships that left Earth, only 23 made it to the Carina dwarf. And of those 23, only 11 were in good enough condition to land on the planet we named New Terra. "So many lost," Kethra whispered. "Yes, but enough survived. Enough to build the first shelters, to plant the first crops, to start the first families. Enough to remember." "Remember what?" Torres turned to look at her directly. Her dark eyes were intense, burning with a fire that Kethra did not fully understand. "Everything. We remembered everything. The cities we had lost, the families we had buried, the world we had been forced to leave behind, and we remembered who was responsible." Kethra felt a chill run through her. The Conquered. The Conquered watched our world burn and did nothing. The Conquered recorded our extinction and flew away. The Conquered told themselves that we deserved what happened to us, that we were too violent, too primitive, too dangerous to live. Torres turned back to the window. "We never forgot that. Every generation we passed the story down. Every child learned about Earth. Every adult swore an oath to remember. We built our entire civilization around that memory. And around revenge." Torres shook her head slowly. "No, that is what the Morthani thought, that is what they expected, but they were wrong." Over the next several weeks, Kethra learned more about human history than any conquered being had ever known. Captain Torres became her guide, taking her through the fleet's archives, introducing her to historians and teachers, showing her records and documents that had been preserved across 4,000 years. She learned about the early years on New Terra, when survival was uncertain and death was always close. The humans had faced challenges that would have broken most species. The planet was harsh, with extreme temperatures and dangerous wildlife. Resources were scarce. The population was small. But the humans adapted. They always adapted. "That is our greatest strength," Torres explained during one of their sessions. "We can change. We can learn. We can become whatever we need to become to survive." She showed Kethra images of New Terra's first settlements, small domes of metal and plastic, clinging to the rocky ground like desperate fingers. Then images from 100 years later, larger buildings, better materials, the beginnings of infrastructure. Then images from 1,000 years later, cities that stretched to the horizon, factories that produced marvels of engineering, a civilization that had grown from nothing into something magnificent. But you did not just survive, Kethra said. You thrived. You built a fleet that surpasses anything the Conquered has ever created. How? Tors smiled slightly. It was the first time Kethra had seen her smile. Because we had to. We knew that someday we would return to Earth. We knew that when we did, the Conquered would be waiting for us. They would see us as a threat just as they had before. They would try to destroy us again. So you built an army. We built a deterrent. We built enough strength that no one would dare attack us. We built enough power that we could demand respect instead of begging for it. She pulled up an image on the display. It showed a massive shipyard, larger than anything Kethra had ever seen, with hundreds of ships in various stages of construction. This is the Forge, Tors said. It is the largest construction facility in human space. Every ship in our fleet was built there. Every weapon, every engine, every piece of armor. How long did it take to build all of this? 3,000 years. That is how long the formal construction program lasted, but the planning started much earlier. The founders began designing these ships before they even landed on New Terra. They knew what they would need. They knew what they were building toward. Kethra stared at the image in amazement. 3,000 years of work, all directed toward a single goal. The dedication was almost incomprehensible. And all of this was for revenge. No, Ambassador, Tor's voice was firm. All of this was for justice. There is a difference. As the fleet approached Earth, Kethra requested permission to speak with Admiral Vance. She wanted to understand the human leader, to learn what drove her, what she hoped to accomplish. Vance agreed to the meeting. They sat together in the Admiral's private quarters, a simple room with few decorations. The only personal items Kethra could see were a few photographs on the wall, showing people she did not recognize. My family, Vance explained when she noticed Kethra looking. My parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents. We keep records of our ancestors. It helps us remember where we came from. That is a beautiful tradition. It is necessary. Memory is everything to us. Without memory, we would lose ourselves. Kethra nodded slowly. She was beginning to understand, she thought. The humans were not driven by hatred or rage. They were driven by memory, by love, by a desperate need to honor those who had come before them. Admiral, she said, may I ask you a personal question? You may ask. I cannot promise to answer. Why did you choose peace? When the Morthani attacked, you had every justification to retaliate. You could have destroyed them utterly. Instead, you showed mercy. Why? Vance was quiet for a long moment. Her eyes drifted to the photographs on the wall, to the faces of her ancestors looking back at her. My grandmother told me a story once, she said finally, about the day they left Earth. She was just a child, barely old enough to understand what was happening, but she remembered standing at the window of her ship, watching her world burn behind her. She paused, her voice growing thick with emotion. She told me that she cried, not from fear but from grief. She was watching everything she loved disappear, her home, her friends, her entire life, all of it turning to ash. That must have been terrible. It was, but that was not the part of the story she wanted me to remember. The part she wanted me to remember was what happened next. Vance looked directly at Kethra, and the ambassador saw something in her eyes, something deep and old and powerful. As they were leaving, one of the other children on the ship said that he hoped the aliens would suffer the way they had suffered. He said he wanted revenge. He wanted to make them pay. And your grandmother? My grandmother said no. She said that what the aliens had done was wrong, but becoming like them would be worse. She said that humans had to be better. They had to remember not just the pain, but the hope, not just the loss, but the love, not just what was taken from them, but what they still had. Vance's voice grew stronger, filled with conviction. She told me that being human meant choosing to be kind even when kindness was hard. It meant choosing to be merciful even when mercy was not deserved. It meant believing that the future could be better than the past, no matter how dark the present seemed. That is a remarkable philosophy. It is the only reason we survived, Vance said simply. If our ancestors had given in to hatred, they would have destroyed themselves. They would have become exactly what the conquered feared they were. Instead, they chose hope. They chose love. They chose to be human. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. When the Morthani attacked us, I felt the same anger that child felt 4,000 years ago. I wanted to destroy them. I wanted to make them suffer. But then I remembered my grandmother's story. I remembered what it meant to be human. So you showed mercy. So I showed mercy, not because they deserved it, but because we deserved it. We deserved to be the people our ancestors dreamed we could be. 3 days later, the fleet arrived at Earth. Kethra stood on the observation deck of her ship, surrounded by human officers who had gathered to witness the moment. Captain Torres was beside her, silent and still, her eyes fixed on the viewscreen. Earth filled the display. It was brown and gray, covered in scars that even 4,000 years had not healed. The atmosphere was thick with dust and poison. The oceans were gone, reduced to dried basins of salt and sand. The continents were barren, stripped of all life. It was the most heartbreaking thing Kethra had ever seen. But the humans did not weep. They did not cry out or turn away. They simply watched, their faces set with determination. "It is ugly now," Tor said quietly, "but it will be beautiful again, you will see." The fleet spread out around the planet, forming a protective ring that stretched from horizon to horizon. Then the work began. Massive ships descended toward the surface, carrying equipment that Kethra did not recognize. Other ships moved to orbit, deploying devices that began to pulse with strange energy. Still others headed toward the edges of the solar system, beginning the process of gathering resources for the long restoration ahead. "What are they doing?" Kethra asked. "Healing," Torres replied. "The first phase is atmospheric restoration. We will seed the atmosphere with microorganisms that will convert the toxins into breathable air. It will take about 50 years. 50 years. That is fast for terraforming on this scale. The next phase is ocean restoration. We will redirect comets to bring water back to the planet. That will take another 100 years. Then soil restoration, biological reintroduction, climate stabilization. Altogether, it will take about 500 years to make Earth livable again. 500 years. It was nothing compared to the 4,000 years the humans had already waited. It was nothing compared to the endless patience they had shown. "You will not live to see it completed," Kethra said. "None of the people working now will live to see it." Torres smiled. It was a sad smile, but also a proud one. "No, we will not, but our children will, and their children after that. That is what it means to be human. We plant trees under whose shade we will never sit. We build cathedrals we will never worship in. We dream dreams that take generations to fulfill." She looked at Earth, at the dead world that would someday live again. "We do it because it matters, because hope matters, because the future matters even if we will never see it." Kethra felt tears forming in her eyes. She had come here expecting to find monsters. She had expected anger and hatred and violence. Instead, she had found something else entirely. She had found a species that had been broken and had chosen to rebuild. A species that had been abandoned and had chosen to forgive. A species that had been given every reason to become cruel and had chosen, against all odds, to remain kind. She had found humans, and in that moment, watching them begin the long work of healing their wounded world, she understood something important. The conquered had been wrong about them. They had been wrong from the very beginning. Humans were not monsters to be feared. They were miracles to be admired. 500 years passed like water flowing down a mountain, slow at first, then faster, then rushing toward an inevitable conclusion. Ambassador Kethra did not live to see the completion of Earth's restoration. Neither did Captain Torres, nor Admiral Vance, nor any of the beings who had been present at the beginning. They passed away in the natural course of time, leaving behind children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who continued their work. But their legacy lived on, and on the day when Earth's restoration was finally declared complete, their names were spoken with reverence by those who had inherited their dreams. The ceremony took place in a valley that had once been called the Great Rift. 500 years ago, it had been a barren scar on a dying world. Now it was green and alive, filled with trees and flowers and the sound of running water. Birds flew overhead, their songs mixing with the wind in the branches. Admiral Chen stood at the center of the gathering, surrounded by thousands of humans and hundreds of alien observers. She was the great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Marcus Chen, who had served as Admiral Vance's executive officer during the return to Earth. Like her ancestor, she had dedicated her life to the dream of restoration. "Today," she said, her voice carried across the valley by floating amplifiers, "we celebrate a dream that took 4,500 years to achieve, 4,000 years of exile, 500 years of healing, and now, at last, we are home." A great cheer rose from the crowd. Humans embraced each other, tears streaming down their faces. The alien observers watched in respectful silence, understanding the magnitude of what they were witnessing. "But this celebration is not just for us," Admiral Chen continued. "It is for all those who came before, for the founders who refused to give up, for the builders who worked without hope of seeing the fruits of their labor, for the dreamers who believed that this day would come, even when all evidence suggested otherwise." She paused, looking out at the valley around her, the green hills, the blue sky, the living world that had been dead for so long. "And it is for those who helped us along the way, our friends in the conquered who found the courage to admit their ancestors' mistakes and make amends, our partners in exploration who have joined us in building a better future, our fellow beings in this vast galaxy who have taught us that forgiveness is possible and reconciliation is real." In the crowd, a silver-skinned figure stood apart from the others. She was young, barely 50 years old by Selvani standards, but she carried herself with the dignity of someone much older. Her name was Kethravel, and she was the direct descendant of the ambassador who had first reached out to humanity 5 centuries ago. She had inherited her ancestors' journals and records. She knew the full story of what had happened during those early days of contact. She knew about her ancestors' fears and hopes, her doubts and discoveries. And she knew about the friendship that had formed between Ambassador Kethra and Captain Torres, a friendship that had laid the foundation for everything that came after. When the formal ceremony ended, Kethravel made her way through the crowd toward Admiral Chen. The human leader noticed her approach and smiled warmly. "Ambassador Kethravel," she said, "I am glad you could be here." "I would not have missed it for anything," Kethravel replied. "My ancestor would have wanted to see this day. Since she cannot, I am here in her place." "She would have been proud." "Yes, I believe she would have been." They stood together in silence for a moment, watching the celebration continue around them. Humans and aliens mingled freely, sharing food and drink and laughter. It was a sight that would have been unimaginable 5 centuries ago. "Do you know what my ancestor wrote in her final journal entry?" Kethravel asked. "I do not." She wrote that meeting the humans had changed her understanding of the universe. She had always believed that species were defined by their past, shaped by their history in ways that could never be changed. But the humans showed her something different. They showed her that beings could choose their future, no matter what their past had been. Admiral Chen nodded slowly. That is a profound insight. She also wrote that she hoped future generations would learn from the humans, not how to build ships or weapons, but how to build hope, how to maintain faith across centuries, how to believe in something larger than themselves. And have they learned? Kethravel smiled. Some have, not all but some, and perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that is how change happens, not all at once but slowly, one being at a time. In the years that followed the restoration ceremony, the galaxy continued to evolve. Old rivalries faded. New friendships formed. The 17 species of the original Concord expanded to include others, including, eventually, humanity. The decision had not been easy. Many humans remembered the old wounds too clearly. They did not want to join the organization that had abandoned their ancestors. They argued that humanity should remain apart, proud and independent. But others argued differently. They said that the past could not be changed, but the future could be shaped. They said that joining the conquered was not a surrender but an opportunity. They said that humanity could be a force for good within the alliance, helping to ensure that what had happened to them would never happen to anyone else. In the end, the second argument won. Humanity joined the Galactic Concord, not as a junior member but as an equal partner. Their ships flew alongside Selvani and Morthani vessels. Their scientists worked with Kethnar researchers. Their diplomats sat in the Great Hall where, centuries ago, their existence had been considered nothing more than a cautionary tale. The Morthani, who had once attacked the human fleet in fear and hatred, became unexpected allies. The descendants of High Commander Vormesh publicly apologized for their ancestors' actions and pledged eternal friendship with humanity. It was a gesture that few expected, but many welcomed. "We were wrong about you," the Morthani representative said during the alliance ceremony. "We thought you were monsters. We thought you would destroy everything we had built. Instead, you showed us mercy when you could have shown us destruction. You taught us that strength does not require cruelty. For that, we are forever grateful." Admiral Chen, who had become humanity's first representative to the Concord Council, accepted the apology with grace. "We do not want your gratitude," she said. "We want your friendship. We want to build a future together where no species is abandoned and no world is left to burn. That is the only repayment we need." 1,000 years after the restoration of Earth, a young human named Sarah stood in a museum dedicated to the history of her species. She was 12 years old, with bright eyes and an endless curiosity about the past. The museum was located in a city called New Alexandria, built on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. It was one of the oldest cities on the restored Earth, founded in the early years of the healing process. Now it was a thriving metropolis, home to millions of humans and thousands of alien residents who had chosen to make Earth their home. Sarah walked through the exhibit slowly, reading every plaque and studying every artifact. She saw images of the old Earth, the Earth before the war. She saw records of the Exodus, the desperate flight into the unknown. She saw models of the early settlements on New Terra, the harsh shelters where her ancestors had fought for survival. And she saw images of the return, the massive fleet emerging from the darkness, the negotiations with the conquered, the 500 years of restoration work that had transformed a dead world into a living one. At the end of the museum, there was a special exhibit. It was called the Hall of Memories, and it contained personal items from some of the most important figures in human history. Sarah stopped in front of one display case. Inside was an old photograph, faded and worn with age. It showed a woman in a military uniform standing on the bridge of a ship. She had gray hair and steel-colored eyes, and there was something in her expression that Sarah did not fully understand, something sad and hopeful at the same time. "That is Admiral Helena Vance," a voice said behind her. Sarah turned to see an old man with white hair and kind eyes. He wore the badge of a museum guide. "I know," Sarah said. "She led the fleet back to Earth. She negotiated with the conquered. She started the restoration." "That is true, but do you know what she is most remembered for?" Sarah thought about it. She showed mercy to the Morthani when they attacked. She could have destroyed them, but she did not. The old man smiled. "That is also true, but there is something more, something that does not appear in most history books." He sat down on a bench near the display case and gestured for Sarah to join him. Admiral Vance kept a personal journal throughout her entire career. It was not discovered until many years after her death. In that journal, she wrote about her hopes and fears, her doubts and dreams. And on the day when the fleet first arrived at Earth, she wrote something that has stayed with me ever since I first read it. What did she write? The old man closed his eyes, reciting from memory. She wrote, "Today I looked upon our dead world for the first time. It was broken and scarred, poisoned and lifeless. Everything my ancestors loved was gone. But standing there looking at that wounded planet, I did not feel despair. I felt hope, because I knew that we had the power to heal it. I knew that we had the strength to rebuild. And I knew that someday children who had never known exile would play in meadows where nothing had grown for 4,000 years. That is why we came back, not for revenge, not for justice, but for them, for the children who will inherit the world we are building, for the future that we will never see but that we know in our hearts is coming." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. She looked back at the photograph of Admiral Vance, at the woman who had led her people home. "She sounds like a good person," she said. She was one of the best of us. But do you know what? She was not special. She was just a human being doing her best to make the right choices. And that is the most important lesson of all. "What do you mean?" The old man stood up and gestured at the museum around them. At all the exhibits, all the artifacts, all the memories of thousands of years of human history. Every person in this museum, every hero and leader and visionary, was just an ordinary being who chose to do extraordinary things. They were afraid, but they acted anyway. They doubted, but they hoped anyway. They could have given up, but they kept going anyway. He placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "That is what it means to be human. It is not about being perfect. It is not about never failing. It is about choosing every day to be better than you were yesterday, to love more than you hate, to hope more than you fear, to build more than you destroy." Sarah thought about this for a long moment. She thought about all the history she had learned, all the struggles and triumphs and tragedies. She thought about her own life, stretching out ahead of her like an unwritten story. "Do you think we will keep choosing right?" she asked. "Do you think humans will always be good?" The old man smiled. It was a wise smile, full of understanding and acceptance. "I do not know. No one does. The future is not written yet. Every generation has to make the choice for themselves. But I can tell you this. For 4,000 years, when we had every reason to become monsters, we chose to remain human. When we could have destroyed our enemies, we chose to make them our friends. When we could have burned the galaxy in revenge, we chose to heal our world instead." He looked at the photograph of Admiral Vance one last time. "We have made mistakes along the way. We will make more in the future. But as long as we remember who we are and what we believe in, I think we will be okay. I think we will keep choosing hope over hate, love over fear, mercy over revenge." He turned back to Sarah and smiled. "That is what your ancestors learned in the darkness between stars. That is what they passed down to you. And that is what you will pass down to your children, and they to theirs, on and on until the end of time." Sarah nodded slowly. She understood now. She understood what it meant to be human. It meant carrying the memory of the past while building the hope of the future. It meant choosing, every day, to be worthy of those who came before and those who would come after. It meant never forgetting and never giving up. She looked at Admiral Vance's photograph one last time, at the woman who had led her people home from the darkness. "Thank you," she whispered, though she did not know if she was speaking to the old man or to the Admiral or to all the humans who had ever lived and hoped and dreamed. Then she turned and walked out of the museum, into the bright sunlight of a world that had been dead and was now alive. The sky above her was blue, the grass beneath her feet was green, birds sang in the trees and children laughed in the distance. It had taken 4,500 years, but they had done it. They had come home. Far above the earth, a station orbited in silence. It was an old station, one of the first built during the Restoration. Now it served as a monument, a reminder of all that had been lost and all that had been regained. On the station's observation deck, a plaque hung on the wall. It contained words that had been spoken by Admiral Helena Vance long ago, on the day when humanity's fleet had first arrived at their ancestral home. The words read, "We left Earth because we refused to become monsters. We spent 4,000 years in darkness, building and dreaming and hopping. We came back not for revenge but for redemption, not to destroy but to heal, not to prove that we could be as cruel as the galaxy expected, but to show that we could be better than anyone imagined. This is our home, this is our past, this is our future. We are human, and we remember everything." Below the plaque, the earth turned slowly in the infinite dark, blue and green and alive. It was beautiful. It was home, and it would remain so forever.